Greetings, Deep Dive Podcast listeners. This is your boy, Sam Orum, coming at you with another episode of the Deep Dive Podcast. Guys, we have an important episode tonight. I wanted to really dive right into a few things, but before I do that, for those of you who are joining us internationally and for those of you who are joining us for the very first time, welcome to the Deep Dive Podcast. I'm excited to just share some things with you about this episode, but all of the previous episodes, we certainly want to get you exposed to what we've been doing. And then also our loyal listeners who've been around for all three seasons. I want to welcome you all as well to tonight's episode. I know you may see it's sunlight here. I'm actually on the West Coast. So even though it's nighttime on the East Coast, we're here on the West Coast, so it's still sunny. But anyway, I want to get into a topic tonight that is very important. I wanted to take the time to kind of interject some notions of the Supreme Court ruling that came down today, basically ending affirmative action. And I have some thoughts on that, and I wanted to share those thoughts, but also I've been getting just a couple of texts and calls, people asking me, what does this mean? What is this all about? And I know a lot of people are not familiar with the affirmative action process, what that entailed. And then also, those of you who are listening from around the globe, this may not affect you directly, but I do want you to understand the nuances of what affirmative action means, because it's not just about this particular court ruling. It's about you being able to assert yourself through an educational system, regardless of where you are in the world. So I think it's very, very important for every single person to understand what it is that I want to talk about, why I want to talk about it, what is the sense of urgency, so forth and so on. I do want to just kind of start from the very beginning and really just sharing with you what affirmative action is, because a lot of people, they may have heard the term and not necessarily understood what does that mean. So what does affirmative action mean? It basically was a policy that was put in place, and it's really aimed to uh, increase, whether it's the workplace or the educational opportunities for underserved or minority people, underrepresented people. That's what the thought behind affirmative action was. The policies were in terms of demographics, in terms of historically low represented individuals. That's what it was all about, to give them an equal opportunity to be able to take advantage of the educational system at the highest level. Okay. So it focuses on demographics. It focuses on the demographics that with historically low representation, people who are not represented just based on where they live or how they grew up or whatever the case may be, who may be underrepresented in leadership or professional situations or academic roles. It's a variety of things, but it boils down to this, guys. It is an opportunity, or has been an opportunity, for people who are minorities to participate in higher levels of education in spite of their race. Okay. Now, when you really look at it, and I don't know, if you guys are even kind of been tuned in today, all of this happened today. If you're not aware, the Supreme Court ruling came down this morning. And so you're going to get all of these varying thoughts from people in terms of, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it okay? Is it not okay? You're going to have certain people putting their spin on it to the left and other people putting their spin on it to the right. Some people have already said, well, affirmative action is not ending, it's just shifting the focus. Well, what does that mean? Shifting the focus from what to what? That's spin to me. That's political spin to me, saying shifting the focus. What are you shifting the focus to? What ultimately does that mean? One thing that I can tell you, um, I have learned over the years, that if something is not a law, right? If certain people are not forced to do certain things, then I don't care what you do, what you say, or what kind of spin you put on it, they're not going to do it. They're not going to do it. They even fight the laws. If look no further than the voting rights challenges that we're having right now. They even challenge the law, let alone challenge something that's that has some form of ambiguity where there is no law. It's just, well, we're shifting the focus. What does shifting the focus mean? That kind of stuff. But bottom line, guys, the ruling means that colleges and universities, they can no longer factor in an applicant's race during the admission process. So you're admitting people or looking to admit people to your level of higher learning, colleges and universities or the like, but you can no longer consider uh, race as a factor in any regard. So I don't know, man. It's for me, if it's not a law, they're not going to do it. They're not going to do it. They're going to have all kinds of things that can circumvent what would be an equal process, but they're going to look to circumvent that. Where you have universities, they already had, even with the law, they had universities who were taking advantage of what do you call it when uh, legacy. So when your father or your mother, or your grandparents or whatever have gone to this university, and then you get preferential treatment because your grandparents or your parents or whomever or donors to this particular university. I think they call that legacy. So they were doing those type things when the law was the law to try to circumvent certain things, right? So if it's not a law, they're not going to do it. I'm more and more and more a proponent now of homeschooling for minority communities. Now, let me be clear on what I'm saying here. The educational system is important for a variety of reasons, and this is not the podcast to talk about that. But the educational system is important. But in addition to that, I think that it's important for us to homeschool our kids in addition to whatever levels of education that they're going through, public education, private education, whatever that may be. The reason I think that's starting to become more and more important is because they're trying to de-incentivize. I'm trying to be politically correct so that I don't get sued. They're trying to take books and history and all of these things out of school because they feel threatened. People ask me all the time when I say they, who do I mean? I mean exactly what I'm saying. Whoever's trying to take books and history out of school. I don't care who you are. When I say they, that's who I'm referring to, right? So they are trying to take history and books and all of this kind of stuff out of school. They're trying to erase certain things and trying to keep you from doing this, trying to keep you from being this, and all of these other things. Look, y'all better wake up. Unfortunately, for the younger generation of people, you are going to be more affected by these rulings and by these thoughts than anybody else. Those of us who are at a certain age, we're not going to be as affected by climate change because, a lot of people may not even be here 30, 40, 50 years from now. We won't be subjected to a lot of the same type of educational barriers because we've gone through that process. We are of a certain age where it doesn't necessarily affect us. But if you have kids, you have grandkids, you have people who are younger in their pursuit of life, then they're going to greatly be affected by climate change. I mean, you can look at it right now, and as of even today, there are historic levels of heat waves that's going on across the country. I could get into a whole variety of things and to show, to talk about the challenges of climate change. You're going to be affected if you're a younger generation. This ruling, you're going to be affected. The attack on voting rights, you're going to be affected by that. Gerrymandering, you're going to be affected by that. So you got to wake up. You got to take your life and your future into your hands. You can no longer be passive about it. You can't even listen to all of the rhetoric that goes on. I don't care if it's rhetoric from the left, the right, or the middle. You can't listen to all of that stuff. You have to be a proponent of education, educating yourself and educating your kids so that you know. I've said this in the past, but it drives me bananas when somebody would come up to me and they would say something like, well, they said, they said, my question is, who is they? I just referenced they earlier, right? But I know exactly who I'm talking about. You can't come to me and say, well, they said, I remember I said this before on a podcast, but one of my very good friends, in the very beginning of COVID, he was like, well, they said black people couldn't get COVID because we got so much melanin in our skin and this, that, and the other. So black people can't get COVID. Well, he's dead today. He died of COVID. So listening to they without educating yourself, that's meaningless to me, right? That's meaningless to me. So I think there's a value now in getting your kids homeschooled, even if it's not exclusively homeschooled, because that comes with, challenges in its own rights, daycare and all these other kind of things. But if it's a co-op between public or private education and homeschooling, so they can still get the benefit of what's going on around their space, then I think that's a good thing. So anyway, getting back to this whole ruling, I didn't want this podcast to be too long, but I know it's very, very important. And again, educating yourselves, guys, on what's going on. A lot of people are just hearing about affirmative action today, but the specific case that actually led to the Supreme Court's decision was actually Students for Fair Admissions. They had a lawsuit against the fellows, president and the fellows of Harvard College, basically students against Harvard. And some of the same thoughts about, admitting people based on race or not based on race is just a whole mess. It's just a whole big mess. And so the lawsuit was filed, by the students for fair admissions, and they filed that lawsuit against Harvard and also I think it was the University of North Carolina as well. And their whole argument was that race-based admissions, that program violated the Title VI, I think it is, of the Civil Rights Act, which we know that came down in 1964, before I was born. But they challenged the fact that that race-based admissions program, it violated the Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So they've gone back and forth, and it ultimately ended up in the lap of the Supreme Court. Here's something else that also just kind of it I don't know, I guess it irks me in a certain way because I'm always holding out hope um, about the best of humanity. I'm always holding out hope. One of my prayers when I pray every day, one of my prayers is I pray for humanity because I think humanity has just been lost. Integrity and respect and all of these things of humanity, because people have just lost their way in so many areas. But when I look at, even the decision made by the Supreme Court, it was pretty much through party lines. I think it was a 6-3 ruling. So you have the conservative justices, those 6 individuals, and then you got the liberal justices, if you will, Sonia Sotomayor, Supreme Court Justice Jackson, and I can't even remember the third. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. But anyway, so I don't really, I don't know. It's difficult because I keep holding out hope that people will just look at stuff for the reality of what it is and not through a prism of their political ideology or their religious ideology, because sometimes even the religious ideology, like abortion, may come into play where you're not looking at the humanity of it all. You may be looking at your political ideology or your religious ideology. That's not to dismiss what you feel politically or religiously, but you cannot assert your religious or your political beliefs and make a decision about somebody else's body. That's just doesn't it doesn't compute to me. I don't think any man anywhere on the planet should be ruling anything about abortion anyway, because what do you know about it? What do we know about abortion? That should be all the decisions that should be made with the women legislators or whatever it may be. But anyway, I'm all off subject. So when you look at the ruling, a 6-3 ruling, uh, with the Supreme Court, I'm a bit disappointed that it just seems to be, even if it's not a reality, it just appears to be down party lines. Like I said, you got the conservative justices, you got Uncle Thomas, I'm sorry, Clarence Thomas, you got, I don't know. It's just a whole mess to me. Here's how I look at things from my perspective. Look, I need to control my life and my future. I need to control the lives of my family and generations yet unborn. That means I need to be superior to any of the foolishness that may take place around me, because there are ways to circumvent everything if you're educated and if you're well financed. So that's what we need to do. We, as a people, we need to become educated. We need to become well financed, and we need to, if you're not already, you need to make sure you have a solid spiritual foundation. If you have those things, then what they do, and again, I know what I'm talking about when I say they, I know who I'm talking about. Then you can circumvent that because you're educated, because you have a financial foundation, and obviously a solid spiritual foundation. So those things are very important, right? So anyway, so with this decision, it's just made it more difficult for minorities to gain admission to colleges, to gain admission to universities. But there are still ways for minorities to pursue higher education. There are still ways, even in the midst of this ruling. But from my standpoint, there are pros and cons to what needs to be done. For example, you can pursue alternative paths to higher education. What does that mean? Well, you know, community colleges, trade schools, vocational schools, gain skills and knowledge, just basically those kind of skills to determine, what your desired career may be. The challenge I have with that, that's a pro, if you will. The challenge I have with that, the con is I don't want us to get into a situation where we are settling for less because somebody else trying to make a decision about our level of education. I don't want us to have to settle for a community college. And I'm not saying anything negative about a community college. That's not the point. I don't want us to have to settle. I want it to be a choice, right? If that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do. But I don't want you to have to settle. But that means you're going to have to do some things. You can't see, we can't continue to just kind of skip through life thinking we're going to get handouts and thinking this is going to happen and thinking, you can't do that. You got to take control of your future right now. You got to take control of your future. So whatever that means in terms of you pursuing alternative paths to higher education. And again, I say that with a caveat. Don't pursue alternatives because you don't feel like you can get into Harvard. That's not the thing. It is just understanding that for those people who are even more affected by it, there are alternative ways that you can ultimately end up in the same place financially or education wise, just based on the path that you decide to take. You can also focus on different levels of academic achievement where you just make sure you focus on getting good grades and higher education type things and good test scores, and increases your chances of being admitted to higher levels of education. If you're going through high school, right? If you're going through community college or whatever the case may be, if you have a plan to get to a Harvard or to a Yale or Princeton or any of these other universities, then focus on your lower level education, getting your grades, doing the things that you need to do. Don't try to, a lot of people, and I've heard people say this in the Black community, it's abomination, but they like, I just want to get out. As long as I get my diploma, I'm good. No, 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 not it. You're not good. This is what continues to perpetuate poverty in the community, because you just decided, oh, as long as I get my diploma, if I can get through school with a C, or I don't know what it takes to graduate, a C or D or whatever it is. No, that's not good enough, especially now moving forward. See, people are trying to take you backwards. And if you don't do the things that you're supposed to do in terms of getting good grades, in terms of focusing in on academia and things of that nature, then you're going to be subjected to whatever's left, whatever's left. You know, I typically, a lot of times I see people who have, and again, I'm not diminishing anything that anybody does, but I've seen people who have what someone would call lower level jobs, whatever that means, right? Lower level jobs. And I often wonder, did they choose these lower level jobs, or was it, selected for them because they did not focus on higher education or getting good grades, or they just wanted to get by? I often wonder that. Did they choose to be have this particular lower level job, or uh, was it given to them based on the fact that they did not go through the educational system and take it seriously? You want to seek out scholarships. You want to seek out financial aid. Again, that goes back to getting good grades. Minorities can search for scholarships and financial aid opportunities that are specifically designed for underrepresented groups of people. There are scholarships and awards for minorities. You can seek those out. Again, there's a pro and a con. Yeah, you can seek these scholarships and financial aid out, but you got to be doing it with the notion that you're still looking to have some level of higher education at some point. So you have to take those things seriously. I think, younger cats, you got to start to advocate for policy change again. It may not be through something like affirmative action because that's a done deal, but the lower courts, state laws, change policies and laws that perpetuate discrimination and inequality. You can do that even on a local level. Here's something that's so important. I want you guys, if you don't hear anything else, I want you to hear this. You got to vote. You have to vote. I've heard so many people every election cycle tell me that, uh, well, why should I vote? Because they're gonna, here they go, this word they again. They're gonna do what they want to do anyway. So why should I vote? This ruling is a direct result, I'm telling you what I know, of people not voting. Because what happens is when you get someone into office, and whatever office it is, then they start to make decisions not just for higher level decisions and laws, but for lower court rulings and judgeships across the country, and things that have a trickle down effect to where it get to a point where now you can nominate Supreme Court justices and they have life terms. And some of these cats are just as corrupt as folks on the street. But anyway, they have life terms, and then now, because of their political ideology, it's become more politicized. I'm talking about the Supreme Court now. It's become more politicized than ever before. So now, based on the fact that people may not be voting, they're not voting down ballot, they're not voting in your local elections, they're not taking voting seriously. You don't know how this directly affects your life. This ruling is an example of that, where kids may or may not have school lunches. That's because people don't vote. If you want your kids to have anything, in terms of books in schools and things of that nature, you got to vote. Whether it's local voting, whether it's state voting, or even national voting, you got to pay attention to what's going on. Racism is a subtle thing, right? And political ideology and tribalism is a subtle thing. You got to be blatant in your opposition to those things that can affect your family. So otherwise, you're like, well, you can't send your kid to college because of this. You can't get food stamps because of this. All these other kind of things. And I'm not saying that, that's your objective, but there are people who are out there who, they need a helping hand. I heard Whoopi Goldberg say this about her. She was on welfare. She wasn't on welfare because she wanted to be on welfare. She needed a helping hand while she was doing what she was doing. Now she's an uber rich, professional, but there was a time she needed that welfare as a handout while she did what she did. She didn't just, sit on the fact that she had welfare or someone that may need food stamps. This is not a permanent situation. It's just to get you through until you can get to where you need to be. And as I start to close out, I want people to start thinking more and more about mentorship and networking opportunities with people that can help. Each one teach one. There are enough of us in different communities, whether it's through the educational system, the legal system, faith-based. You want to seek out, good, solid, faith-based leaders so they can give you that solid spiritual foundation that you need when things get tough, right? You want to seek mentors, people who can pour into you and help you along your journey. You want to seek these things out. And, I've said this 1,000 times. I'm a big proponent of mentorship. I am a mentor to people, and I have been mentored by people, some of the best people. And I am who I am today because of mentorship. Lastly, when you think about higher education, I don't want people to dismiss the fact that HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, to me, can be the answer for a lot of people. I am a graduate of an HBCU and also UAB in Birmingham, but my time at Florida A&M University in Tallahassee as an HBCU, and the time that I was there, it was always one of the top one or two HBCUs in the country. And after graduating and understanding, when you're in college, you kind of got rivals with everybody, Howard and Jackson State and Tennessee State and all these other, Alabama State and all these other, you're in college and you got all these rivalries, you talk about each other and all this other kind of stuff. But once you get out of that competition, you understand that we're all one family and we have to root for each other as HBCUs, right? And I think I need to do a podcast on that, but we need to kind of root for one another because I think that is a solution. When I was at Florida A&M, our School of Business, SBI, we had a dean, Sybil Mobley, and our business school, if I'm not mistaken, was either number one or number two to Harvard. Number one and number two to Harvard. That was Dean Sybil Mobley and our SBI business program at Florida A&M. Y'all got to forgive me. We talking about a long time ago. So try to remember names and dates and all of this other kind of stuff. But our business school, and I didn't even take business there. I was there for pre-med and music. And but business school being number one, that was a sense of pride. Once I graduated and started looking at all the HBCUs, man, there's so much value in all of these HBCUs, the Morehouses of the world, the Howards of the world. I think they're one of the top institutions, HBCU. And when I say that, these are historically Black colleges and universities, but at the end of the day, they are not second fiddle to the Harvards of the world. And that's my whole point. It's the fact that, you can get a higher education, you can get that family environment, that community environment, some things that I've talked about in the past. All of these things are a part of you being at the highest level of education. So look at these HBCUs, start to pour money and resources and everything into the HBCUs, because with this ruling, again, it's going to be on us to do what we need to do to get even to become what we always desire to come. I heard to become, I should say. I heard President Obama talk about this earlier, just briefly. Everybody's a little still shaken by this. Not everybody, but shaken by the whole thing. President Obama talked about how he was a benefactor of, or he benefited from affirmative action. He was a student at Harvard. He benefited from affirmative action. Michelle Obama benefited from affirmative action. I think it was Princeton where she graduated. You have to understand that and think about this. Were it not for affirmative action, and I'm not saying this as an absolute, I'm just giving my opinion, but were it not for affirmative action, I don't think there would have ever been a President Obama. Think about that for a second. Without affirmative action, I don't think there would have ever been a President Obama. Wow, that's deep. So We have to take all of these things in consideration, guys, as we move forward with whatever it is that we're doing with education, with empowering people. We got to take life more seriously. We can't just, we got to make a change, guys. I'm begging people to pay attention to what's going on. If you pay attention to it, these people aren't that smart. I can tell you that. They're not that smart. They're cunning, though. They're cunning, and there's a difference. They're cunning. But if you pay attention, a snake is cunning. But if you're looking down and you see there's a snake coming towards you, you know how to avoid it, right? A snake is coming. Cunning. It's not smart, it's cunning. A lot of these people are cunning. They ain't that smart, though. But if you pay attention, you can walk around or away from that snake, or you know how to kill a snake. But you got to pay attention. You can't be sitting on, playing video games and, trying to live above your means. You're trying to buy all of these fancy things to impress people and doing all of this stuff on social media to impress people. All that stuff is a facade. It's not even real. What we're talking about today is real. You see how far TikTok going to get you when you're trying to get into Harvard, or see how far TikTok is going to get you when you're trying to get to a certain level of education. Even well, you know what I'm saying, right? You got to start paying attention. You got to start thinking. We got to start helping each other. We got to start supporting each other. We got to go back to supporting each other. Right now, one of the biggest enemies of minorities are minorities. We do more damage to each other than, they do. So you got to pay attention. You got to pay attention. All right. I can go on and on and on, but I wanted to just kind of share this with you today. This is on my heart because of this ruling this morning. It is what it is, guys. We just got to be able to know what it is, understand what it is, circumvent what it is. We just got to. Once you know better, you can do better. All right. So thank you guys for joining me on this particular episode of the Deep Dive Podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, download, and share. This podcast is probably as important as any that I have ever done. And you really want to share this information because people need to know, even if it doesn't affect you. I'm through with my university and the educational system type stuff. I'm in the real world now doing real world things. But if you got kids, grandkids, great grandkids, or even generations yet unborn, you need to share this podcast so people can start educating themselves on what's going on right around them every single day. If you don't, you're going to be subjected to whatever is given to you, and that's going to be your future. So with that, again, like, subscribe, download, and share. Go to the Deep Dive Podcast live. Go to YouTube, the Deep Dive Podcast with Sam Orum. Watch the video, listen to the information, share the information, get it into the hands of your family, friends, and don't forget some of the things that we talked about. Give me some feedback too on the Facebook Live, not Facebook Live, but the Facebook group page, which is the Deep Dive Podcast. Give me some feedback on what you think and how we need to follow up with this. All right. So with that, guys, thank you so very much for joining me on tonight's episode of the Deep Dive Podcast. Let's continue to be great, and I'll see you on the beaches of the world. God bless.